Jake Murphy stood in the doorway of Laboratory 7, staring at what had to be the most intimidating classroom in the known galaxy. And that was saying something, considering he'd already gotten lost 3 times trying to find it in a university that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Well, he muttered to himself, adjusting his decidedly non-holographic backpack. At least the chairs looked cherished. The Galactic University's Advanced Xenobiology program was housed in a crystalline spire that twisted through space like a cosmic DNA helix. Very impressive, very alien, very much designed by beings who had never heard of the concept of keeping things simple. Jake had been walking in circles for 47 minutes before a helpful maintenance drone took pity on him and literally dragged him to the right floor. Professor Klix noticed Jake's entrance immediately. Hard not to, really, when you're the only bipedal mammal in a room full of creatures that looked like they'd been designed by a committee of particularly creative nightmares. "Ah," Professor Klix announced, his 6 arms spreading in what Jake assumed was either a welcoming gesture or a threat display. "Our primitive exchange student has finally arrived. Class, please welcome Jake Murphy from the backwater planet Earth, was it?" The way Klix said Earth made it sound like he was announcing the discovery of a new type of bacteria. Not particularly dangerous bacteria, mind you, just disappointing bacteria. Jake raised his hand in a casual wave. "Hey everybody, sorry I'm late. Your campus is basically a maze designed by someone who clearly never had to carry textbooks." A chittering sound came from the front row. That would be Zara, Jake had learned from his orientation materials. She was what humans might generously call insectoid, if insects grew to be 6 feet tall, had way too many eyes, and vibrated constantly like they'd been mainlining espresso for a decade. "Oh my stars and quantum fluctuations," Zara chittered, her mandibles clicking rapidly. "Is it true that your species evolved on a Class 12 death world? How are you still alive? Do you have internal armor plating, hidden weapons, redundant organ systems?" "Nope," Jake replied, sliding into the only empty seat, which appeared to be made of some sort of self-suggesting crystal that immediately tried to scan his biological functions. "Just good old-fashioned stubbornness and an alarming tolerance for things that want to kill us." From somewhere behind him came a sound like boulders grinding together in an earthquake. Blorg, the university's first Litoid student, was apparently expressing amusement. At least Jake hoped it was amusement. With rock people, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference between laughter and preparing to avalanche someone. "Death world survivors always exaggerate," Blorg rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of mountains. "My home world has storms that can strip stone from bedrock. Your little planet probably just has some moderately inconvenient weather." Jake grinned. "Well, we do have these things called hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, blizzards, droughts, flash floods, and about 40,000 species that produce various toxins. Oh, and mosquitoes." "What?" asked a tiny voice from somewhere near the ceiling. "Are mosquitoes?" That was Pip, who existed as a small cloud of sentient energy that somehow managed to maintain a constant state of indignant confusion about the physical universe. Pip had been very excited to meet Jake, apparently being the first energy-based life form to encounter a solid creature that didn't immediately try to harness them for power generation. Blood-sucking insects about the size of well, you don't have fingernails, but they're really small, and they make this incredibly annoying buzzing sound while they're trying to drain your blood. The silence in the classroom was profound. Even Professor Klix's 6 arms had stopped their constant gesticulating. "Your planet," Zara whispered, "allows tiny creatures to consume your life essence. For fun?" "Oh, not for fun," Jake clarified helpfully. "They need our blood to reproduce. We're basically a planetary buffet." Blorg's geological laughter resumed. "Impossible. No intelligent species would evolve in such conditions." "Yeah, that's what we keep telling ourselves, too." Professor Klix cleared his throat, which sounded like a coffee grinder having an argument with a blender. "Yes, well, fascinating as your species' apparent death wish may be, we have actual science to conduct today. Advanced xenobiology is not about swapping primitive survival stories." Jake nodded politely. He'd been getting variations of this lecture since arriving at Galactic University 3 weeks ago. Apparently being from a Class 12 death world made him either incredibly tough or incredibly stupid, and most of his professors seemed to lean toward the latter explanation. The thing was, Jake wasn't even supposed to be here. He'd been a veterinary student at Colorado State, minding his own business, when some cosmic bureaucratic error had flagged him as Earth's most qualified xenobiological candidate. By the time anyone figured out the mistake, he was already halfway across the galaxy with a full scholarship and a dormitory assignment next to a methane-breathing philosophy major who kept trying to discuss the existential implications of oxygen addiction. But the administration had decided it would be too embarrassing to send him back, so here he was, presumably representing humanity's best and brightest in a field he'd only encountered in badly translated textbooks that kept referring to the art of not getting eaten by things that shouldn't exist. Now then, Professor Clix continued, activating what appeared to be a holographic projector crossed with a kaleidoscope. Today, we will be observing proper containment and analysis procedures for apex predator species. This is advanced work, requiring precise adherence to 17 different safety protocols, quantum-locked containment fields, and a thorough understanding of predatory behavioral matrices. Jake looked around the lab, taking note of the various energy barriers, robotic assistants, and what appeared to be emergency teleportation pads built into the floor. Either Professor Clix was really serious about safety, or today's lesson was going to be significantly more exciting than the syllabus had suggested. Our subject today, Clix announced with obvious pride, is a specimen I've been tracking for 3 academic cycles. Class, meet the most feared predator in this sector of the galaxy. The holographic display shimmered, and suddenly Jake was looking at something that made every horror movie he'd ever seen look like a children's cartoon. "Oh," he said mildly, "that's a big kitty." Professor Clix's 6 arms gestured dramatically at the holographic display, clearly expecting gasps of terror and academic appreciation. What he got instead was Jake squinting at the image like he was trying to remember where he'd left his car keys. "Behold," Clix announced, "the shadow maw of Kepler 442b, apex predator, perfect killing machine, responsible for the extinction of 14 separate colonization attempts." The creature in the hologram was, Jake had to admit, pretty impressive in the nature red in tooth and claw department. About the size of a Clydesdale horse but built like a tiger that had been hitting the gym and taking steroids. Its fur was the color of space itself, seeming to absorb light and hope in equal measure. 6 legs, each ending in claws that looked like they could open cans or spacecraft with equal efficiency, and the head, well, the head featured more teeth than seemed mathematically possible, arranged in a way that suggested its designer had been really enthusiastic about the concept of bite force. "Magnificent," Zara chittered nervously, her compound eyes reflecting the hologram in about 47 different directions. "And by magnificent, I mean absolutely terrifying. Please tell me we're observing this from a different solar system." "Standard protocol," Clix assured the class, "dictates observation from behind Class 9 containment barriers. The specimen is currently in the holding chamber, adjacent to this laboratory, secured by quantum locks, neural dampening fields, and a comprehensive sedation system." Blorg's rocky form shifted uneasily, creating a sound like a small landslide. "Even sedated, such creatures retain considerable danger potential. On my homeworld we have legends of the stone render, which shares similar characteristics. The legends always end with, and then everyone died horribly. Which is why," Professor Clix continued, clearly enjoying his role as the bearer of terrifying knowledge, "we maintain strict academic distance. No physical contact, no direct neural engagement, purely observational study through approved technological interfaces." Pip's energy form flickered with what Jake was learning to recognize as anxiety. "Question, if this creature is so dangerous, why do we need to study it at all? Can't we just not?" "Science, my dear students, requires understanding our galaxy's most dangerous inhabitants. Knowledge is power, power is safety, safety is survival." Clix had clearly rehearsed this speech. "Now, let us proceed to the observation chamber." The class filed through a series of increasingly intimidating security doors, each one requiring biometric scans, quantum key verification, and what appeared to be a brief psychological evaluation to ensure nobody was planning to do anything stupid. Jake found himself wondering exactly how often students tried to do stupid things with apex predators. The observation chamber was everything Jake expected from a high-tech alien university. Lots of blinking lights, floating displays showing incomprehensible data, and energy barriers that hummed with enough power to probably level a city block. Through the transparent aluminum viewing wall, Jake could see into the containment chamber. And there it was. The Shadow Maw looked even more impressive in person, if you could call something that seemed to be made of concentrated nightmare impressive. It was pacing in what Jake recognized as the classic pattern of a caged predator. 3 steps, turn, pause, repeat. Its tail, which was apparently prehensile and ended in what looked like a combination spear tip and can opener, lashed with barely controlled energy. Observe the neural dampening field indicators, Professor Clix instructed, pointing at a display showing peaceful green wavelengths. The creature's aggressive impulses are safely suppressed. Note the quantum containment matrix strength at 97%. Multiple redundant safety systems ensure. That's when the lights went out. Not just some of the lights, all of them. The lab plunged into darkness so complete that Jake couldn't see his own hand in front of his face, which would have been concerning enough, except for the fact that the humming sound of the energy barriers had also stopped. "Oh," said Professor Clix, in a voice that had suddenly climbed several octaves. "That's not supposed to happen." Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in an ominous red glow that made the situation feel less like minor technical difficulty and more like opening scene of a disaster movie. "Neural dampening field is offline," Zara announced, her voice reaching frequencies that probably violated several noise ordinances. "Containment matrix showing critical failures across all 7 backup systems." From the containment chamber came a sound that Jake could only describe as what would happen if Thunder learned how to be really, really angry. The Shadow Maw had stopped pacing and was now staring directly at the observation window with eyes that glowed like dying stars. "Fascinating," Blor grumbled, though his usual confidence seemed to have developed some serious cracks. "The creature appears to be experiencing what my people would call complete homicidal rage." "Security Protocol 17, Click shouted, all 6 of his arms working frantically at different control panels. "Activate emergency containment. Deploy backup neural dampeners. Someone contact the hazardous creature response team." That's when they heard the sound of claws on metal. Long, deliberate scraping sounds, like someone drawing fingernails across a chalkboard, if fingernails were made of diamond-tipped steel and the chalkboard was the universe's most expensive containment system. "Professor," Pip's tiny voice somehow managed to convey absolute terror, "I think it's coming through the wall." The scraping sounds intensified. On the viewing wall, stress fractures began appearing in patterns that looked suspiciously like claw marks. "This is impossible," Clix muttered, his academic composure finally beginning to crack. "Quantum-bonded transparent aluminum can withstand the impact of a small asteroid. Nothing organic should be able to track." A section of the viewing wall split completely, creating a gap just large enough for something very large and very angry to squeeze through. "Oh good," Jake said, conversationally, as his alien classmates began what could charitably be called panic responses and less charitably called complete psychological meltdowns. "I was wondering when this day was going to get interesting." The Shadow Maw pushed its head through the crack in the wall, fixed its glowing eyes on the classroom full of terrified students, and opened its mouth to display approximately 96 teeth, each one the size of a railroad spike. Then it roared. Jake had heard lions roar at the Denver Zoo. He'd heard bears roar in the Colorado mountains. He'd even heard his neighbor's Rottweiler roar at the mailman. This was nothing like those sounds. This was what would happen if an earthquake decided to become a sound engineer and specialized in creating audio that could liquefy courage. When the roar ended, the only sounds in the laboratory were Zara's terrified chittering, Pip's electrical crackling, Blorg's geological groaning, and Professor Clix frantically trying to contact security while simultaneously attempting to hide behind equipment that was nowhere near large enough to conceal 6 armed academics. And Jake, who was standing perfectly still, watching the Shadow Maw with the expression of someone trying to solve a mildly interesting puzzle. "Hey there, big guy," he said quietly. "Having a rough day?" The Shadow Maw's glowing eyes fixed on Jake with the kind of attention usually reserved for particularly interesting lunch options. Behind him, Jake could hear his classmates engaging in what sounded like competitive hyperventilation. "Murphy," Professor Clix's voice had achieved a pitch that probably violated several laws of physics. "Step away from the containment breach. Activate your emergency beacon. Assume defensive posture protocol 7. Jake glanced back at his professor, who was currently attempting to hide his 6-armed frame behind a holographic projector roughly the size of a toaster. "Defensive posture protocol 7. Curl into a ball and pray to whatever primitive deities your species worships." "Ah!" Jake turned back to the Shadow Maw, which had managed to squeeze more of itself through the widening crack in the wall. "Yeah, I'm gonna go with Plan B." "What's Plan B?" Zara chittered from somewhere near the ceiling, where she'd apparently discovered that terror gave her species previously unknown climbing abilities. "Wing it." Jake took a step forward. The collective gasp from his classmates sounded like a small atmospheric breach. Pip's energy form flickered so violently that the emergency lighting began strobing in sympathy. "Human Jake," Blorg's voice carried the grinding authority of continental drift. "That creature has eliminated 14 separate colonization attempts. Its bite force exceeds that of industrial mining equipment. Its reflexes operate at superhuman speeds." "Yeah," Jake said, taking another step toward the increasingly agitated predator. "But look at its body language." "Its body language?" Click sputtered. "It's a killing machine. It doesn't have body language. It has killing language." Jake ignored him, focusing on the shadow maw. The creature was still forcing its way through the breach, but something about its movements was bothering him. Its ears, if those triangular things could be called ears, were pressed flat against its skull. Its tail was lashing, but not in the controlled, predatory way he'd seen through the viewing window. This was different. "You're scared, aren't you?" Jake said quietly, continuing his slow approach. "All that roaring and snarling. You're not angry. You're terrified." The shadow maw paused in its struggles, tilting its massive head to stare at Jake. For a moment, the only sound in the laboratory was the distant wailing of security alarms, and Zara's continued chittering, which had developed harmonics that suggested she was approaching some kind of insectoid nervous breakdown. "Jake," Pip's tiny voice somehow managed to convey volumes of concern. "I really think you should reconsider this approach. My energy sensors are detecting massive stress readings from that creature. Stress readings that suggest it's about to do something very violent and very final." "Exactly." Jake was now close enough to see his reflection in the shadow maw's eyes, which were the color of deep space and about as welcoming. "It's stressed. Question is why?" Behind him, Professor Clix was frantically working his communication device. "Security Team 7, this is an emergency. We have a containment breach in Laboratory 7. Full hazardous creature response required. Bring the big guns, all of them." The shadow maw's attention snapped to Clix's voice, and its lips pulled back to reveal those impressive teeth again. A low growling sound began building in its chest, like a diesel engine having an existential crisis. "Hey," Jake said firmly, and the creature's attention immediately returned to him. "Easy there. Nobody's going to hurt you." "Nobody's going to hurt it?" Zara's voice had reached frequencies that were probably causing dogs to howl 3 star systems away. "It's going to hurt us. That's what apex predators do. They apex. Violently." Jake held up his hand in what he hoped was a universal calm down gesture, though given the diversity of galactic life forms, it might have been the universal please eat me first gesture. Hard to tell without a proper xenocultural handbook. "Think about it," he said, not taking his eyes off the shadow maw. "This thing has been locked in a box, probably for months, poked and prodded and studied by creatures it's never seen before. Every time it tries to sleep, someone's shining lights at it or taking readings or running tests." The shadow maw had managed to get its front shoulders through the breach now. Up close, Jake could see that its fur wasn't actually fur at all, but something that looked more like living shadow. Individual strands seemed to move independently, creating patterns that were hypnotic and probably evolutionarily designed to confuse prey. Unfortunately for the shadow maw's evolutionary programming, Jake had grown up on a ranch in Colorado where his family raised animals that most sane people would consider livestock only in the technical sense. Brahma bulls with attitudes that could be seen from space, horses that viewed humans as interesting obstacles to be removed via creative kicking, and one particularly memorable llama named Ferdinand, who'd had strong opinions about everything and the temperament of a caffeinated tornado. "You know what I think?" Jake continued, his voice calm and conversational. "I think you're homesick. I think you miss your territory, your pack, your hunting grounds. I think you've been stuck in a sterile lab being studied by beings who are absolutely terrified of you, and you can smell their fear every single day." The growing sound from the shadow maw's chest began to change, becoming less impending doom and more large cat with respiratory issues. "And I think," Jake said, taking another step closer, "that nobody has bothered to actually try talking to you like you're an intelligent creature, instead of just a really impressive collection of teeth and claws." "Jake," Blorg grumbled, "even if you're correct about its emotional state, it remains a creature capable of rendering stone into component molecules. Perhaps this would be an appropriate time to implement a more cautious approach." "Caution's overrated," Jake replied, now close enough that the shadow maw's breathing was ruffling his hair. "Besides, look at its eyes." From his classmates came a variety of sounds suggesting they would rather look at literally anything else in the universe, up to and including the inside of a black hole. They're not predator eyes, Jake explained. Predator eyes are focused, calculating. These are, he paused, studying the creature's face. These are puppy dog eyes. Really big, scary, potentially lethal puppy dog eyes, but still. The shadow maw had gone completely still, watching Jake with an expression that might have been curiosity if curiosity came equipped with enough dental work to open a particularly aggressive dental practice. My grandfather always said, Jake continued, extending his hand slowly toward the creature, that there's no such thing as a mean animal, just scared animals, hurt animals, and misunderstood animals. Your grandfather, Professor Click squeaked from behind his inadequate cover, clearly never encountered a shadow maw. No, Jake agreed. But he did raise prize-winning bulls, break wild horses, and somehow convince Ferdinand the llama not to spit on visitors more than twice per week. Same principles apply. The shadow maw lowered its massive head until it was level with Jake's extended hand. Its nostrils, each about the size of tennis balls, flared as it took in Jake's scent. That's it, Jake murmured. Just checking me out, making sure I'm not a threat. You're not a threat, Zara chittered from her ceiling perch. You're lunch. A really confident, possibly insane lunch, but still lunch. Jake ignored her, focusing entirely on the creature in front of him. The shadow maw's breathing had slowed, becoming deeper and more relaxed. Its ears had lifted slightly from their flattened position. Good boy, Jake said softly, finally allowing his fingers to make contact with what passed for the creature's forehead. Or girl, hard to tell from this angle. Good. Creature. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The shadow maw's eyes half-closed in what could only be described as bliss. The growling sound from its chest transformed into something that sounded remarkably like, "Is it purring?" Pip asked in amazement. "It's purring," Jake confirmed, scratching behind what were definitely ears, even if they were ears designed by someone with a very aggressive aesthetic sense. The galaxy's most feared apex predator leaned into Jake's touch like a house cat discovering belly rubs for the first time. Well, Jake said conversationally to his stunned classmates, this is new. The sound of the shadow maw purring was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. It was like listening to a motorcycle engine that had achieved inner peace, or perhaps a freight train that had discovered meditation. The creature's entire body vibrated with contentment, creating harmonics that made the remaining lab equipment hum in sympathy. This is impossible, Professor Clix whispered, his voice barely audible over the purring. Shadow maws don't purr, they snarl, they roar, they emit subsonic terror frequencies that cause psychological trauma in sentient beings. They do not purr. Yeah, well, Jake said, continuing to scratch behind the creature's ears while trying not to think about how each one of its teeth was roughly the size of a butter knife. Maybe nobody ever gave it a reason to purr before. The shadow maw had managed to squeeze most of its body through the breach now, and Jake was getting a much better appreciation for just how large apex predator could be. Standing upright, the creature would have been taller than his dorm room. Its paws were the size of dinner plates, equipped with retractable claws that looked like they could carve initials in titanium. And it was currently doing its best impression of an oversized house cat that had just discovered the magical properties of chin scratches. Jake, Zara chittered from her ceiling refuge, I don't want to interrupt what is clearly either the most brilliant or most suicidal moment in xenobiological history. But that creature is still capable of accidentally killing you, just by being enthusiastic about whatever you're doing. Good point. Jake shifted his position, moving from behind the creature's ears to under its chin, where there appeared to be a sweet spot that made the purring intensify to levels that were probably registering on seismic equipment 3 floors down. Hey, big guy, how about we make some room here? To everyone's amazement, the shadow maw actually seemed to understand. It carefully maneuvered its massive body, settling down on the laboratory floor with a kind of precise control that suggested it was very aware of the fragile alien beings around it. Once it was lying down, the creature's true size became apparent. Even sprawled across the floor, it was roughly the dimensions of a small aircraft. Its tail, which had been lashing with agitation earlier, was now moving in slow, hypnotic waves that suggested deep contentment. This is fascinating, Blorg rumbled, his geological composure beginning to return now that the immediate threat of violent death had been replaced by the bizarre spectacle of interspecies bonding. Our xenobiological texts clearly state that shadow maws are solitary, aggressive, and incapable of forming positive associations with non-prey species. Maybe your xenobiological texts Jake suggested, discovering that the creature had a spot behind its left ear that made its back leg kick in a way that was both adorable and potentially destructive. Were written by people who never actually tried talking to one. Professor Clicks had emerged from behind his equipment, all 6 arms working frantically to record what was happening. This is unprecedented, absolutely unprecedented. I must document everything, the implications for our understanding of predator psychology, of interspecies communication, of... He trailed off as the Shadow Maw opened one eye and looked at him with an expression that clearly communicated, "You're interrupting my ear scratches, 6 arms." "Perhaps documentation can wait," Click squeaked, ducking back behind his holographic projector. Jake grinned, continuing his ministrations. The creature had rolled slightly onto its side, exposing what appeared to be its belly. In Jake's experience, when a predator showed you its belly, it was either the ultimate sign of trust or a trap that would result in your arms being removed at the shoulders. "What do you think?" he asked the Shadow Maw conversationally. "Belly rub time?" The creature's response was to roll further onto its back, displaying a stomach that was covered in the same shadow-like fur as the rest of its body. Its legs folded up in a way that would have been comical if each paw wasn't equipped with enough hardware to disassemble a small building. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Jake laughed, and began rubbing the creature's belly. The purring sound immediately doubled in volume, creating vibrations that made dust fall from the ceiling and caused several pieces of delicate scientific equipment to rattle off their tables. The Shadow Maw's back legs began moving in a kicking motion that looked exactly like every dog Jake had ever given belly rubs to, except scaled up to industrial proportions. "It's a puppy," Pip announced, her energy form flickering with what Jake was learning to recognize as amazement. "The galaxy's most feared apex predator is actually just a really big puppy." "A really big, lonely puppy," Jake corrected, working his way across the creature's surprisingly soft belly. "Probably hasn't had any social contact in months, no wonder it was acting out." From somewhere in the distance came the sound of running footsteps and shouted commands. The security team, Jake realized, was finally arriving to deal with the containment breach. "Oh, this should be interesting," he muttered. The laboratory doors burst open, and a squad of heavily armed security personnel poured into the room. They were led by what appeared to be a battle-hardened veteran of several different species, wearing armor that looked like it had been designed by someone who really wanted to make sure nothing could bite through it. "Everyone stay calm," the security chief barked, raising what looked like a weapon that had been crossed with a small artillery piece. "We're here to... He stopped mid-sentence, staring at the scene in front of him. The galaxy's most dangerous predator, the creature that had required 17 different safety protocols and quantum-locked containment, was lying on its back getting belly rubs from a human exchange student, and purring loud enough to rattle windows. "Is that," the security chief asked slowly, "a Shadow Maw?" "Yep," Jake replied cheerfully, discovering that the creature had a ticklish spot near its ribs that made it squirm in what was probably the most adorable display of potential lethality in recorded history. "And you're..." the security chief continued, his weapon slowly lowering as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. "Petting it?" "Belly rubs, actually. There's a difference." The security team stood in the doorway, their various weapons and containment devices suddenly seeming rather unnecessary. Behind them, Jake could hear more footsteps, as what sounded like half the university's administration arrived to witness the crisis. "Professor Klex," came a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to having their questions answered immediately. "What exactly is the situation here?" Dean Qualix, the university's chief administrator, appeared in the doorway. She was a tall, elegant being who looked like she'd been designed by someone with very refined aesthetic sensibilities and a fondness for crystalline structures. Her usual expression of calm academic authority faltered as she took in the scene. "Well," she said after a long pause, "this is new." The Shadow Maw, apparently deciding that it wasn't getting enough attention, reached up with one massive paw and gently batted at Jake's arm. The gesture was unmistakably playful, the kind of thing a cat might do when demanding more petting. "Did it just..." Dean Qualix began. "Ask for more belly rubs," Jake finished. "Yeah, I think so. You're a pretty smart cookie, aren't you?" he asked the creature, who responded by rolling further onto its back and exposing more belly for rubbing. The silence in the laboratory was profound. Every being present, from students to security personnel to administrative officials, stared at the unprecedented sight of peaceful interspecies contact with a creature that, according to all available scientific literature, should have been systematically dismembering everyone in the room. "So," Jake said conversationally to his audience, Anyone got any questions about predator behavior? Professor Click stared at his life's work being systematically demolished by belly rubs. His 6 arms hung limply at his sides as he watched the creature that had been the subject of his doctoral thesis, his postdoctoral research, and 3 published papers on advanced predator containment theory roll over like a dog begging for treats. "My PhD," he whispered, "is in advanced predator theory." "Well," Jake said, giving the shadow maw a particularly good scratch that made its back leg kick enthusiastically, "maybe it's time to update the theory. I wrote a 600-page dissertation on shadow maw's psychological warfare techniques. How's that working out for you?" Clicks made a sound like a deflating balloon. "They don't use psychological warfare. They use puppy dog eyes." From her perch on the ceiling, Zara chittered nervously. "If this creature is actually docile, what does that mean for our understanding of other supposedly dangerous species? I've spent 3 semesters learning proper terror responses to creatures that might just need a good petting session." "My homeworld's most feared legend," Blor grumbled thoughtfully, "is the stone render. We've built entire cultural mythologies around avoiding it. But now I'm wondering, what if it's just lonely? What if it just wants someone to polish its rocky exterior?" Pip's energy form flickered with revelation. "Energy beings have maintained strict non-contact protocols with physical species for millennia because we assumed you were all aggressive and unpredictable. But maybe we just never tried saying hello properly." Dean Quallick stepped forward, her crystalline features reflecting the emergency lighting in patterns that suggested deep thought. "Mr. Murphy, are you suggesting that our entire approach to xenobiology has been fundamentally flawed?" Jake looked up from where he was now playing what appeared to be a gentle game of tug-of-war with the shadow maw using a piece of broken containment equipment. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just scratching behind some ears." The security chief lowered his weapon completely. "Sir, we've got 17 different containment protocols for this species, emergency response teams, specialized equipment, and you're telling me the solution is belly rubs," Jake confirmed. "Though to be fair, you've also got to find the right spot behind the ears. It's all about the technique." The shadow maw, apparently bored with the tug-of-war game, had discovered that Jake's jacket made interesting rustling sounds when investigated with a nose the size of a dinner plate. Its tail was wagging. Actually wagging, like the galaxy's most dangerous predator had secretly been a golden retriever all along. "This changes everything," Professor Kleiks muttered, still staring at the scene. "Decades of research. Entire academic careers built on the assumption that these creatures are inherently hostile." "Maybe they are inherently hostile," Jake suggested, allowing the shadow moth to thoroughly investigate his pockets for anything that might be food adjacent. "When they're locked in cages and treated like monsters instead of intelligent beings." "But the colonies," Dean Qualix protested. 14 failed settlements, the reports of violent attacks. Ever think maybe they were just defending their territory from invaders who showed up with weapons and containment fields instead of proper introductions? The shadow maw had discovered that Jake's backpack contained something that smelled interesting. It was now gently attempting to open the zipper with claws that could theoretically slice through starship hulls, displaying the kind of delicate motor control that suggested considerable intelligence. "Careful there, big guy," Jake said, helping with the zipper. "Just some granola bars in my xenobiology textbook." He pulled out one of the granola bars, and the creature's eyes immediately locked onto it with the focused attention of someone who had been living on institutional food for far too long. "Here," Jake said, unwrapping the bar. "Earth food. Probably won't kill you." The shadow maw accepted the offering with the gentle precision of a creature very aware of its own strength. It sniffed the granola bar carefully, then consumed it in a single bite that managed to be both terrifying and somehow polite. Then it looked at Jake expectantly. "Oh no," Jake laughed. "I've created a monster. A granola-addicted monster." "This is unprecedented," Dean Quallick said, watching the interaction. "Absolutely unprecedented." "Yeah," Jake agreed, scratching the creature's chin as it continued to eye his backpack hopefully. "Maybe it's time for some precedence." 3 weeks later, Jake found himself in the unlikely position of being Galactic University's first interspecies relations consultant, a job title that had been invented specifically because nobody knew what else to call someone who had revolutionized xenobiology through the application of belly rubs. The shadow maw, now officially named Shadow by popular vote, had become the university's most beloved mascot. It spent its days lounging in the expanded laboratory, greeting visitors, and occasionally helping with research by demonstrating that most aggressive behaviors were actually pay attention to me behaviors. The applications are pouring in, Dean Qualix informed Jake as he arrived for his morning routine of making sure Shadow got proper ear scratches. Every xenobiology program in the galaxy wants to know about human-animal handling techniques. Jake grinned, watching Shadow's tail start wagging the moment he entered the room. Hate to break it to you, but there's no secret technique, just common sense. Professor Clix, who had surprisingly adapted to the new paradigm by writing a paper titled Reconsidering Predator Psychology, a comprehensive analysis of overlooked social behaviors, looked up from his notes. The Kepler colony has reported successful contact with 3 previously hostile species, using your methods. They're calling it the Murphy Protocol. The Murphy Protocol? Approach slowly, speak calmly, offer snacks, and pet anything that looks like it wants petting. That's actually not bad advice for most situations. Zara had come down from the ceiling permanently and was now volunteering at the university's new Misunderstood Species Rehabilitation Program. Blorg had contacted his homeworld about potentially making peaceful contact with the legendary Stone Render. Pip had started an energy being outreach program for scary physical creatures who just needed friends. There is one small matter, Dean Quallen said carefully. Your academic status. You're technically still enrolled as an exchange student, but your actual qualifications... Jake scratched Shadow behind the ears, causing the creature to emit a purr that rattled the windows. Yeah, about that, I should probably mention that I'm actually a veterinary student. I got lost looking for the bathroom on my first day and somehow ended up in advanced xenobiology instead. The silence in the laboratory was profound. You're a veterinary student, Professor Click said slowly, specializing in large animal care, horses, cattle, that sort of thing. And you've been attending xenobiology classes for 3 weeks. Really interesting stuff, by the way. Very different from what I'm used to, but animals are animals. Dean Qualix's crystalline features shifted through several colors, which Jake had learned indicated either deep thought or impending bureaucratic complications. So you're telling me, she said finally, that you revolutionized our understanding of interspecies relations because you treat alien apex predators the same way you treat Earth livestock? Jake considered this. Pretty much, yeah. Shadow, apparently sensing that the conversation wasn't sufficiently focused on ear scratches, gently nudged Jake with a head the size of a small car. Although, Jake added, giving Shadow the attention it was clearly demanding, Earth livestock doesn't purr nearly this well. Remarkable, Professor Clix muttered, making notes. Absolutely remarkable. We've been overcomplicating everything for centuries. Usually are, Jake agreed. Turns out most problems have pretty simple solutions. You just have to be willing to try the obvious thing first. Dean Qualix nodded slowly. Mr. Murphy, would you be interested in a permanent position here? We seem to have a lot of dangerous creatures that might benefit from your expertise. Jake looked around the laboratory, at his alien friends who had become genuine friends, at Shadow, who was now sprawled across half the floor in a display of complete contentment, and at the stack of applications from colonies across the galaxy requesting help with their monster problems. You know what, he said, giving Shadow one final scratch behind the ears. I think I'd like that. Shadow purred in agreement, the sound echoing through the laboratory like a diesel engine that had achieved enlightenment. And in that moment, Jake Murphy, accidental xenobiologist and professional common sense provider, realized that sometimes the best way to understand the universe was to just pet it and see what happened. After all, everything was just animals. Some of them just happened to be from other planets.